Hey,
Hey, how you doing?
pretty good. How about you?
Doing well.
Yeah, dressed up pretty nicely. I like that.
Yeah, I had a couple interviews today, so
Nice.
had to
What were
get
the
those
interviews
done. Full-time position once I get out of grad school with a couple of accounting firms.
for? Hell yeah. It's pretty sick.
Yeah,
Cool.
big
So,
boy
in case this is
stuff.
the hell yeah, adulting shit, right?
Yeah, fucking killing it, dude.
So, in case this is a YouTube video, what's up, guys? We're doing a Q&A today. So I'm here with my client, Van. You want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah. What I've been working with you for a couple months now, seeing great progress. Um, just a typical grad student with semi-competitive bodybuilding aspirations.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day. Exactly.
Yeah,
Not in the books right now, but maybe one day.
definitely got a lot of potential. So,
Sweet.
you got some questions for me? We can do a Q&A for this.
Yeah, so so some of these questions, a lot of them we've already talked about, but I like the way you phrase things and I kind of want to get it down. Find that to be a lot of help, very helpful. Also, some of these I know the answer to, but like I said, just kind of the way you present them is helpful. I'll
Totally.
write them down here, but first one, I was just talking about different hormones. Cortisol, leptin, testosterone, insulin, all, any ones that you would throw out there as well. What do they do? Do we want them high or low? Do we want them constant or spiked? What affects it, and what are we doing to influence them?
Okay,
So,
so
you want to start with like cortisol?
yeah, so I'll start with cortisol and testosterone because those basically counter each other. So
Okay.
cortisol is our natural stress hormone. When you are stressed, whether it's psychologically or physiologically, like from training, from not getting enough sleep, from work, whatever it is, you're going to have increased cortisol levels. So what happens when your cortisol levels are higher is you're going to hold on to more water weight, so you're going to look more bloated, basically, and it can also decrease the rate that you can uh, lose body fat and build muscle. So your body's going to be in a stress state, so it's going to be harder to make progress, whether you're trying to bulk or cut. So that's why it's kind of a very good idea to maintain calmness as best as possible all the time. And that's why a lot of the best bodybuilders are very calm, relaxed, easygoing. Now, on the flip side, is the opposite of cortisol is basically testosterone. So if you have very high cortisol levels, you'll have lower testosterone levels. It's not perfectly correlated, so it's not like if your cortisol is here, your testosterone is always going to be here. But with higher testosterone, with higher cortisol, that will have an impact on your testosterone. And so if you, let's say, have lower testosterone levels, then that's going to obviously have really negative impacts on your entire life, really, psychologically and physiologically. So with testosterone, the main thing that we are concerned about with testosterone levels is how it affects your physique. Obviously, it's going to have an effect on your confidence, your drive. So if you have low testosterone levels, you're not going to be as driven, you're not going to be as confident in yourself, things like that. But in terms of building muscle, testosterone is an androgen. And androgens are basically these hormones that help with building muscle and increasing, well, they're not technically always anabolic, but they will give you these androgenic effects. So if, let's say, you have higher testosterone levels, you will get the androgenic effects of facial hair, voice dropping, things like that. But also what happens when you have, let's say, more testosterone in your body, you have more receptors, because if your body notices that there's all this testosterone in your body, now it has to respond. And so the receptors on the outside of your muscle cells will have to duplicate. And so in order for you to take in more testosterone, you have to create more receptors on the outside of the muscle cell. And that allows you to build more muscle proteins. You have the androgens come in, bind to the receptor, that triggers muscle protein synthesis. And so that's why you want higher testosterone levels, so that you're able to build more muscle constantly at a faster rate, versus having less testosterone that builds less muscle.
So in a dumbed down version, with asterisks keeping progressive overload, more testosterone, more muscle, in a very dumbed down way.
Yes, there are multiple facets that create muscle protein synthesis. Testosterone is just one of them. Amino acids in the bloodstream is another one of them. Training is another one of them. So having all these three in check or optimized will allow you to build muscle optimally, versus just taking testosterone and eating potato chips on the couch.
Yeah. Okay. The other two I've listed here is leptin and insulin.
Yeah. So let's see. Leptin and ghrelin are two antagonistic hormones. Insulin isn't related to those, so I'm going to do leptin and ghrelin first. Basically, ghrelin is your hunger hormone, and so when you don't eat, ghrelin increases. Think of like your stomach growls, so gur, so it's like ghrelin. When your stomach is empty, you have increased ghrelin. And when you're dieting, your ghrelin increases, and leptin also, well, let me think. Ghrelin increases, leptin decreases. And so if you want to keep leptin elevated, you want to incorporate refeeds. So the reason why you would want that is because leptin is basically the control center of fat loss. So if you are constantly in a deprived state, constantly in a caloric deficit, just pulling your metabolism down, pulling leptin levels down, keeping ghrelin levels elevated, then you're not going to be optimizing how much body fat you can actually utilize. So the purpose, you got a question?
No, yeah. So you said ghrelin, if I'm pronouncing that right, is the hunger hormone, and leptin is like the anti-hunger hormone.
So it does suppress your appetite. So in a way, yes, but I think of leptin more as the control center of fat loss. So leptin will cause other things to happen in your body to trigger fat loss. So that's what I think of leptin as.
And leptin and ghrelin work in opposite of one another. So if you can't, if you're really hungry, your fat loss isn't optimal.
So there are a few things that affect hunger. That's why, like, when we do our check-ins, I ask you a bunch of questions, because if I just ask you if you're hungry and don't know anything else, or if I don't even ask you if you're hungry, then I don't know a full picture. So when you're dieting, if let's say, if you don't have a refeed, you could get hungry. But let's say if you have a refeed, that can make you hungrier. So it's a lot of different things that affect hunger. And there's also a difference, I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole right here, but there's a difference between hunger and appetite. So hunger is the physiological need for food. Appetite is the psychological need for food. So when you're dieting, of course, there's a psychological component to wanting food when you're depriving yourself of calories and food. So that could also play a role, and it doesn't even have to do with hormones that makes you want to eat more. But if you were to just think about it like common sense, if you're pulling yourself down from your normal set point of body weight, like if you're normally 200 pounds comfortably and you're pulling yourself down in a caloric deficit, you're 190, you're 180, your body's going to increase your ghrelin levels in order to get you to eat more, to get back to that comfortable body weight, in order to not always be hungry. And this is just one reason for a refeed. We have a refeed, whether it's a refeed meal, a refeed day, or a refeeding period, where it could be 2 days, it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, where you're increasing the amount of food you're eating, telling your body it's okay, relax, decrease the ghrelin, increase the leptin, and that allows you to keep leptin up and metabolism up in order to keep driving the fat loss. So that's how leptin and ghrelin really work.
So they work
Antagonistic.
in opposing one another. Yes. Okay.
Exactly. Yes. So then insulin, I would say insulin and glucagon. Glucagon is the opposite of insulin. So when you, this all has to do with blood sugar. So when you eat carbs, first it goes in your mouth, down your esophagus, into your stomach, into your small intestine. And so your pancreas will notice if you have more glucose or blood sugar in your bloodstream, and it will secrete insulin into your bloodstream to shuttle those carbs somewhere. So that's what insulin is. It's a shuttling hormone. It'll shuttle it either to your muscles or it'll shuttle it to your fat. And it depends on a few things. Depends on how full of glycogen your muscles are, how insulin sensitive you are. It depends on a lot of things, how fat you are also. So with higher body fat levels, you will be more likely to store more carbs as body fat, so you're more insulin resistant. And if you're leaner, then you're more likely to store carbs as muscle glycogen, so you're more insulin sensitive. It also depends on how many carbs you eat all the time, how much carbs are in your bloodstream. If you're on a low carb diet, let's say if you're on a low carb diet and you're lean, you're going to be more insulin sensitive. So you're going to be able to take a lot more carbs in as muscle glycogen. So insulin will take the carbs from your bloodstream and put it either into your muscles as muscle glycogen or into your fat cells as fat. Now let's say, and so that happens when you eat carbs. Let's say you go 5-6 hours without eating carbs. What's going to happen is your liver has glycogen also. And so glucagon, the opposite of insulin, will take the stored carbs, glycogen, from your liver and release it into your bloodstream. So that's how you don't become hypoglycemic if you don't have type 1 diabetes. You will, let's say if you go all day without eating, you're still going to have blood sugar. You're not going to just die of hypoglycemia. Your body has like a way to survive, and it is by having this stored carb source in your liver, and glucagon secretes that glycogen into blood glucose to maintain that stable blood glucose level.
Okay. And then, so we aren't really influencing our insulin in a direct way, but besides just making sure we have carbs, do we try to spike our insulin periodically, or do we want to keep it constant? Or
we want to keep a steady level of insulin. So we don't want, with really any hormone, we don't want peaks and valleys. We want to maintain a steady level of everything, like with testosterone. For example, if you were to use, let's say, exogenous testosterone, what do you think would happen if you were to take a bunch of testosterone twice a week? Every 2 weeks is what I mean. And so you have a very big peak and a very, very big valley. Same with insulin, is if you have a shit ton of carbs all at once, like let's say you eat a huge dessert, a bunch of candy, whatever, and then that has a spike in insulin, that has a few consequences. So what can happen is you can't use all of those carbs as glycogen because you don't have enough insulin in order to store all of those carbs as glycogen. So you're going to have higher blood sugar. We want to maintain stable blood sugar throughout the day. That has an effect on your energy levels. So insulin can also make you tired. If you have very high insulin levels, or peaks is what I mean, that will cause you to feel more tired. And imagine if you go out and have a cheat meal, you're going to feel pretty tired after that. So that's because of the insulin that caused you to feel tired. So you want to maintain steady insulin levels throughout the day. The way to do that is a few things. You want to eat lower glycemic foods. So let's say white things like white bread, white rice, candy, sugar, those are going to be higher glycemic. And if you were to eat them by themselves, you're going to have a big spike in insulin and you're going to have a crash after, like a sugar crash, basically. You're not going to feel that sustained energy over time. And you're probably going to be able to store all of it as glycogen as well. You're just going to burn right through it. So let's see. What was I saying? Forgot what I was saying.
keeping it steady, how we keep it steady.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So the best way to keep insulin levels stable is to, one, not eat high glycemic foods, eat lower glycemic foods. And what that means is complex carbs. So there's ways to create less of a glycemic response, and it can be from the individual foods themselves. So choosing whole grain bread instead of white bread, or just a more complex carb such as jasmine rice or brown rice instead of white rice, but also combining the food with other foods. So if you were to eat just carbs alone, you're going to have a higher glycemic index or glycemic response versus having carbs and protein. Same with carbs, proteins, and fats. It's slower digesting. You're going to slow the digestion and slow the absorption from eating protein with the carbs, and even fats, which are even slower digesting than protein. And the biggest thing is fiber. Fiber you will find in complex carbohydrates, and so those carb sources are going to be lower glycemic. So if you were to have, let's say, something fast digesting, such as some cereal, some not whole grain cereal like white cereal, that will have a spike in insulin, versus having some protein with it, it will have less of a spike in insulin, versus having that carb source as a whole grain cereal, or even having some vegetables with it. Combining it with something that will digest slower will have a less of an impact on your insulin. That's basically how you keep your insulin levels stable, is having fiber and fats.
So we want to keep it steady, but as far as post-workout, why do we, give ourselves an insulin rush then?
So because insulin is an anabolic hormone, it's a shuttling hormone, it allows you to take molecules or macronutrients and shuttle them into somewhere where they can be stored. So after we deplete the glycogen in our muscles, and we also break down the muscle proteins, we want to start that recovery process as soon as possible. So we do want that spike in insulin post-workout because we are we have less blood sugar, less glycogen post-workout. So that's the time when you do want to have something that's higher glycemic and digest quickly. So an example of that would be some protein cereal. So get some Rice Krispies with a protein shake, put that protein shake on the Rice Krispies, and there you got your simple carbs and your protein. What that'll do is the insulin will see that you have those easily digested carbs in your bloodstream, as well as the protein from the protein shake. And the insulin will take those carbs and protein and put them to where you just depleted them from, which is the muscle, and allows that recovery process to start as soon as possible and build as much muscle as you can, versus waiting 3 hours post-workout and being more sore because you didn't take advantage of optimizing your recovery.
Okay, sweet. Is there any other hormones you want to touch on? Those are the only ones I have listed.
Those are the main ones that I really focus on in terms of like fitness and bodybuilding. Of course, there's like also neurotransmitters that are important, serotonin, dopamine. Those have psychological effects that affect people when they are losing weight or gaining weight. So I try to stay sensitive in terms of everything. Insulin, try to stay sensitive with insulin. Don't be just pushing 1,000 carbs a day every single day. Allow yourself to stay sensitive to everything. Pull it down a little bit, then push it up, then pull it down, push it up. The dopamine, don't be constantly consuming dopamine all the time. Pull it down a little bit and then give yourself a little bit. Pull it down a little bit. Stay sensitive with basically everything. That's like my biggest belief with hormones, neurotransmitters, really anything, honestly.
One more question that I went back to leptin. So do we want leptin levels high because they are the control if the goal is fat loss?
Yes. So higher leptin levels don't mean that you have higher body fat levels. If you have, let's say you're a fat fuck and you want to just eat as much as possible, you'll still have higher leptin levels, but that's not just going to stop you from eating more. There's a lot more processes that cause you to want to keep eating more, such as insulin. So when you're, let's say, really fat and obese, you're going to have higher leptin levels, but also higher amount of body fat. When you are cutting, you're going to be decreasing body fat and also decreasing leptin. So you don't want to just keep running yourself into the ground and pulling leptin down as you're pulling body fat down. You want to keep leptin up as you're pulling body fat down. And so these periodic refeeding periods of a refeed day, refeed meal, or like 2 days or whatever, 3 days, whatever it is, that allows you to keep leptin up, and that allows you to keep burning fat while being in a caloric deficit.
Okay, sweet. Next question I had is kind of about like nutrient timing, but not so much, throughout an entire day. You talked about post-workout and obviously pre-workout to fuel your workouts. But as far as like your belief on getting, similar increments of protein throughout your day versus having more of a lump sum at dinner, what's your beliefs on that?
My idea is optimization. So is it going to kill you to intermittent fast? No. Can you make progress doing intermittent fasting? Yeah. But what is optimal for you in terms of the science and also the reality? So if you work a 16-hour day, 12-hour day, whatever it is, and you just do not have time to eat, then you're going to be better off eating all that protein in one meal versus not eating any protein at all. But if you're, let's say, able to eat 4, 5, 6 meals a day, I would prefer you to constantly be giving your muscles protein frequently throughout the day in order to keep promoting muscle protein synthesis. So since a lot of people want to see what the boundaries are in terms of what they can get away with, like intermittent fasting versus whatever it is, and a lot of those people are natural, they aren't taking any exogenous hormones, they have to optimize as much as they can. And why would you want to not be giving your muscles this one facet of muscle protein synthesis when you could be? So that's why I recommend eating 4, 5, or 6 meals at least per day with protein, because protein, just like androgens and just like training, are going to signal mTOR, which is the molecule for building muscle, to take amino acids and convert them into muscle proteins. And so that's basically why I say keep eating protein throughout the day, every day, so you can keep signaling muscle protein synthesis and take advantage of what you have as a resource, especially being natural.
Okay, so, when in applying to someone who's on a cut, and what trade-off is it to have, protein every 2 hours versus saving that food for when you're more hungry?
So there's a few things I would say about that. One is you can save your carbs and fats from when you're more hungry. Let's say if you wanted to go out to eat, and you're not like on like an actual bodybuilding prep where you have a show coming up, but like just like an actual, just regular cut, and you want to go out to dinner and it's a Tuesday, for example, and your one cheat meal per week is on a Saturday, I'm not going to say bring your chicken and rice and a Tupperware to dinner. Just eat less carbs and fats throughout the day, and then have those carbs and fats later at night, because that's usually what people want when they go out to eat, is the carbs and fats, not really the protein, unless you're going to like some steakhouse or something, and then yeah, you can take a little bit of protein out from earlier in the day. That's fine if you do that from like one meal, maybe 2 meals. But in terms of a cut, what I would want to happen is to keep feeding your muscles up with protein as much as possible, as frequently as possible. But is it going to mean that if you, let's say, have 2 meals or even 3 meals in a day, or even 1 meal, that you're not going to, or that you're going to lose all your muscle? No, it's really just, what do you want to optimize? What tools do you want to use in order to build your project? And these are just the tools that I like to use, because like, I might as well. Anything works. You can get lean eating 1 meal per day. I'm not saying you can't, but what is most optimal for reaching your goal as soon as possible and effectively as possible? That's basically what I like to think of it as.
Okay, sweet. And this question kind of ties in. So is being hungry, bad for muscle loss, or does it create muscle loss? And I don't mean hunger as far as like, not eating for 8 hours. I mean hunger as in like I ate 3 hours ago, but I'm already starving.
That's a good thing. You want to be hungry 2 to 3 hours or 2 to 4 hours, whatever it is, after you eat, because that means that your metabolism is up. So you want to keep your metabolism up, even though metabolism isn't perfectly correlated with appetite, but it's an indicator that it could be. So if your metabolism is up, then you're probably going to be hungrier because your body's like, I'm in a big caloric deficit. I don't want to be in a caloric deficit. So it's going to tell you, eat more. So that happens because of ghrelin. So when you don't eat for a while, it's simply because your stomach is saying, I want food. Is it bad for like losing muscle? No. You're going to be hungry. Like, just thinking of it as an evolutionary thing. If you don't eat for a little bit, your body's going to tell you, I'm hungry. And that's just a natural thing. When you're in a caloric deficit, you're going to be hungry, and it's something that people don't want to accept. Same exact thing with bulking. You're pushing yourself out of homeostasis. So homeostasis is where you're comfortable. And if you're pushing yourself whichever direction, your body's going to say, no, I don't want to do that. So your hunger is going to decrease. Ghrelin is going to decrease when you're bulking. It's going to increase when you're cutting, because your body wants to stay at a certain spot. But knowing why you're doing this, knowing what you're doing, and knowing why your body is telling you, I'm hungry, that is going to help you with a successful cut, because like, I know I'm hungry and that's okay. It's expected. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing and just lay in bed hungry until it's time to eat my next meal. And if you're not hungry ever on a cut, that's telling me that you're probably in too low of a calorie intake. So if you're eating 1,000 calories per day, you're probably not going to be hungry, because now your body is slowing down its metabolic processes in order to conserve energy. And so you're not going to be as hungry. So you want to be hungry in a cut, because that tells you you're in a caloric deficit. And that's how you lose body fat over time.
So you definitely answered my question when you said laying in bed being hungry, because for me, I'll be in class and I'll be like, yeah, I'm hungry, but I can push through the hunger. Am I losing muscle mass by pushing through the hunger versus, going to have a protein shake now versus in 2 hours when I get home?
So this is what I would think about is, are you giving your muscle a reason to stay? Are you training as hard as you can and progressively overloading? Are you eating enough protein? If you are, then that tells me you're probably not going to use or lose muscle, because your muscle has a reason to stay there. And so if you're in a caloric deficit, then your body has to look to two sources of energy. Is it going to use muscle for energy? Well, I need muscle in order to survive, because I'm putting my body through all these crazy situations of having to lift crazy amounts of weights frequently for high amounts of reps and stuff. So I'm not going to use muscle, because that's just going to hurt me. So I'm going to use body fat for energy, because that's an easy source of energy that I can use. And so when you're hungry, you're taking energy from your fat sources, or from your fat storage. And it also depends, it's very relative. If you're in a very big caloric deficit, if you're eating 1,500 calories a day and you're burning over 2,000 calories a day, then you could lose muscle tissue, especially if that absolute deficit, like 1,000 calorie deficit, is causing you to not be able to train as hard and progress. That's when you know you're probably going to start losing muscle, and that's when I would pull calories up, or at least pull training volume down in order to maintain your strength. That's what's really going to maintain your muscle tissue, is how much load you're using, and of course the execution within that load. But yeah, if you're optimizing your training, you're progressing in your training, and you're giving enough protein, then you're going to be fine. You're going to be hungry, and that's okay, but you're just know that you're losing body fat.
Okay, sweet. And this one kind of ties in. So, then what causes muscle loss, and how do you prevent it, and how fast does it actually happen?
Depends. So I have a good example is, about 2 years ago, I was in a car accident with one of my ex-girlfriends, and she was severely injured, and she couldn't do anything but lay in bed. And so we used to go to the gym together. We were both in fitness, and she had some muscle, she had quads and all this stuff. And literally after a week, she lost so much muscle, so much weight. She went probably, if I were to guess, from 120 120 to 90 pounds. And she just lost like all, first it was the glycogen in her muscles. That's the easiest source of energy. So she lost the glycogen. And then because her muscles were not being used, she was literally laying in bed and she wasn't eating enough protein. She just lost all of her muscle. She still had a little bit of body fat on her because muscle is actually an expensive source of energy. So if you're not training your muscle, if you're not giving enough protein, your body's going to want to use muscle for energy first because it's so dense with energy versus fat. So if you're not giving your muscles a reason to stay through training and through protein intake, that's when atrophy can occur. Being in a caloric deficit is relative, obviously. So if you're in a 500 calorie deficit, you're eating 2,000 calories and you're burning 2,500 calories, then you're probably not going to lose muscle mass because your deficit isn't too large to the point where it's going to have an impact on your training. And so because it's not going to have an impact on your training, you're still able to progress in training, give your muscles a reason to stay there. And so the size of a caloric deficit, assuming that the protein is high enough, isn't going to create muscle atrophy. There's also a difference between muscle atrophy and glycogen depletion. Your muscles can look smaller because you're in a caloric deficit. That just means that you're losing glycogen. You have to get a little flat in order to lose fat. I think I might have told you this before. You can't be full your entire cut while losing body fat because glycogen is the first place that your body wants to take energy from. It just comes and goes, and it's very easy to put like gain muscle glycogen and lose. So when you first start a cut, like the first 3 days of a cut, you're gonna look terrible because you went from being bulky to same amount of body fat, but now you have less muscle glycogen, so now you just look skinnier. But throughout the next week, now you're losing some body fat, and so now you're looking a little bit leaner, and then you fill up with a refeed, and now you're leaner, you fill up with glycogen, now you look even better. And you just keep doing that pull fat down. As you're pulling fat down, glycogen is also depleting. You fill up the glycogen. One reason is to keep training progression intact. So that's how you prevent muscle loss, is by not staying in too large of a caloric deficit that will impact your training, and also by having at least a gram of protein per pound of body weight, if not 1.5 grams per pound of lean body mass, which is what I usually go for, is that equation instead of just 1 gram of body weight.
Okay, sweet. Another question kind of tying in. So this is about building muscle. I know it definitely would range per person, but like for the natural person, at what body fat percentage can you stop building muscle in a deficit?
Let's see. So when you're in a deficit, how lean? Yeah, so it does depend per person because let's say if you started to cut at 20% body fat versus 10% body fat, person at 10% body fat can get leaner and still build muscle. So once you get down to like, for most people, if you're like under 7% body fat or even under 6% body fat, like the very, very leanest you can be, that's when your joints are very dry. You don't have much body fat in your joints, and you're not able to basically train as hard as if you have a healthy amount of body fat, like between 8 and 15% body fat, to where you can actually train hard and train heavy and not have as much joint stress. So that's really where I would say like your progression in the gym really will not keep improving, is once you're basically about 4 to 6 weeks out of a show, that's when like you're lean enough and your energy levels are low enough to where you just have to really try to maintain your strength as best as possible by still tracking your training. But in the first, let's say like 12 weeks of a cut, you probably won't lose any muscle strength or size. If anything, it would be on any bench pressing, just because it's very common to lose like chest strength, not chest size, but just strength, because you have less mass to be able to push, and also you have an increased range of motion from the decrease in body fat. So in my experience, once I got to like a certain point in my prep, my my chest strength, like my benching strength, would start to either maintain or decrease. But my squat and like rows and all that type of stuff will actually keep increasing. So it really depends. But the best way to maintain strength in the gym is to do two things. One is to track your training. So you write it in your notes. You write flat dumbbell bench on your notes, and then under it you write 100 x 10 for your top set, and then 90 x 8 for your back off set. And so you write the rest of your workout in your notes app, and then next week go back to that, copy and paste it underneath, and then you see you did last week hundreds for 10 and then 90s for 8. Try to do hundreds for 11. Try to do 90s for 9, and keep beating it that way. That's how I would make sure you're holding yourself accountable to progressing in the gym, especially when you get to points in your cut, your diet, your prep, whatever, where energy is starting to get really low, is holding yourself accountable to knowing what you actually have to hit. And then also, in order to keep progressing in terms of loads and reps, is to decrease volume in terms of amount of sets you do over time. So as you go through a cut, let's say you start your cut at 12 to 14 sets per body part, per workout. So if you're doing, let's say, 5 exercises per muscle, that would be 2 to 3 sets per exercise. So that's how you're starting your cut, for example. Then as you decrease in body fat, decrease in energy storages, then you're going to notice, like, I don't feel as strong, or I feel more fatigued. When you notice that your strength is starting to decrease and or your fatigue is starting to increase, that's when you should talk to yourself and be like, all right, instead of doing 3 sets on this exercise, I'm going to do 2 sets in order to maintain my strength. That's what's going to maintain your muscle mass, is not the amount of volume you do. You don't want to increase the amount of sets you're doing, because that's going to just add more fatigue. You want to increase the amount of increase the demand on the muscle through the prep within each set, increase the stimulus within each set, not increase the volume. You want to decrease in order to keep the strength up throughout a cut.
Okay. Depending on to what you just said, I know you're a fan of like low volume training. You see all the time the study of, the optimal training is 10 to 20 sets per week per muscle. I mean, how do you feel about that? I mean, because my assumption with that is that every set is not taken till absolute failure. But whereas with more low volume training, you really are pushing that threshold to, if not past failure. So with that in account, how does that play into that, 10 to 20 perfect volume?
So they both work. It really just depends on what works best for you. And what you just have to think about is what builds muscle. Progressive overload. What is the best way to progressively overload? The best stimulus to fatigue ratio. So getting the most stimulus on the muscle with the least amount of fatigue. So fatigue can come from, well, many things, obviously, stress, but in your training, you can get more fatigue from doing more sets, as well as doing higher effort, training to failure, training past failure, or even closer to failure. Both of those will increase the amount of fatigue that you have. Which one is going to create more of a stimulus on the muscle to grow? So what I've found, what I've learned, and what I believe is that getting the most out of each set is the way to get the most stimulus on the muscle with the least amount of fatigue. But I don't want to preach that doing the minimum amount of sets is the best way to build muscle, because what if you can do more and recover from it and progress? That means you're probably going to build more muscle. It's not perfectly correlated, so don't think that just doing 100 sets in a workout and being able to progress on one of those sets because you're progressing is the best way to do it. I would say start on quality and then building quantity. So what I do for a lot of people and what I've done for myself is take them from doing their standard 3 to 4 sets per exercise or 15 to 20 sets per workout, where they're not really training even close to failure, definitely not to failure, maybe training to failure on the last set of every exercise or some exercises, but really just doing extra unnecessary volume. I want them to actually understand why they're doing what they're doing. And so I pull their volume down, not thinking that that's the best way to build muscle is by saying do 1 set per exercise, but it's to teach them, this is what I want you to do, is get the most out of just 1 set. If you can do 20 reps on this set where 15 is fucking hard, get to 20. See how many reps you can actually do in that 1 set. Now, see how many of those sets you can actually do. That's where you're starting the quantity and then building up in quantity, maintaining that quality. So that's basically what I would say in terms of low volume. For most people that are in the intermediate to advanced category, not like just beginner to intermediate, but people who actually know how to train hard, that's where you don't need as much volume in order to still get that stimulus, because we know how to actually push to failure, push past failure. It's on a mental level and not just, oh, I'm tired, that's failure. That's the beginner mindset of failure, where they can do more sets, like the beginner to intermediate stage of training. So you'll see guys doing a bunch of sets and they're a year or 2 into training and they're making gains. Well, that just proves the low volume theory is not true, right? It's because they all work. If you're progressively overloading, you're going to build muscle. But what's the best long-term plan? What's going to create the most amount of muscle growth in the shortest amount of time for the longest amount of time? So that's why I go by bringing the set amount, like the set amount, all the way down, building up to find your maximum recoverable volume, which could be 20 sets of legs in a workout. You'll be fucking destroyed. And if your recovery has been able to, your recovery ability has been able to increase through progression in volume, then you might get to a point where you're doing 20 sets of legs for 2, 4, or 6 weeks. And then you'll get to a point where, all right, now I'm in an over fatigued state because I did so much volume. Then it's time to pull back and do a deload, and then start back from the bottom with lower amount of sets and building up in volume from there. That's basically how volume progression can really work. It's not the best way to progress because you can't just keep adding on more sets. The way to keep progressing over time is to find that sweet spot of where you're not doing too much volume to where you're over fatiguing yourself, but you're at a point where you're feeling like you're creating enough muscle damage from the amount of volume. You're sore for 48, maybe up to 72 hours, and you're progressing, and then progressing in loads and reps over time. So same with the 2 sets per exercise or whatever rep range it is, 10 to 15, 8 to 12, and building up in reps each week, and then increasing weight and sticking with that volume. That's what I found works best for me with taking the least amount of deloads throughout the year. That's basically what I found works best for me, is that like low to moderate amount of volume.
And so quickly, if you could just touch on what exactly, I mean, deload is kind of self-explanatory, but how is that executed as far as volume?
So there's different types of deloads. What I do for my deloads and what I do for most people's deloads, it depends on obviously the reason for it. For most, I don't want to say most people, for a lot of people, it's because of central nervous system fatigue. It could be from joint pain, but let's just say it's because you just feel constantly fatigued. You always just want to lay in bed and like you've been doing a lot of high volume training and high effort training. From there, I would pull your volume down, keeping your intensity up. So intensity means just the load on the bar, how much weight you're using. It doesn't mean effort actually. So what I would do is, let's say you're doing 3 sets per exercise, for example. I would pull that down to 1 set per exercise, keeping the weight where it was before, but leaving like 1, 2, or 3 reps left in the tank so that you're not just pushing yourself into the ground, still allowing yourself to recover, but keeping your strength there. Because if you do a deload where you reduce the loads by however much, if you reduce loads at all, really, you're going to come back into the gym after the deload and feel a lot weaker because your body isn't as acclimated to those weights. And then you have to build back up in strength, and you're not going to want to keep doing that. You're going to be like all like upset that you got weaker from the deload. So the best way to deload to dissipate the fatigue is to pull back on the volume to just like 6 sets, maybe 8 sets, but like around 6 sets per muscle per workout, or even per week. And starting from there, let's say you do 6 sets per muscle with 2 to 3 RIR, 2 to 3 reps in reserve, 2 to 3 reps left from failure. Start with that and see if you can progress from it. Each week, get closer to failure, maintaining that same amount of volume until you get to a point where now you're training each set to failure, and then adding 2 intensifiers on top of your workout, so 2 total intensifiers per workout, and so you can still progress. Then from there, add on a back off set, and then just keep progressing from there, seeing like as you progress in recovery abilities. That's how I would move out of a deload. But that's basically how I would deload, is bring volume down, keep the loads high, and effort just a little bit less than failure.
Okay, sweet. And so if on a rest day, if the assumption is that I can recover from this, if I want to hit, 2 top sets of an exercise to failure, is that beneficial, detrimental, or just absolutely pointless?
2 top sets, like an entire workout, just 2 sets total?
Yeah, like I'm just passing by the gym and you know what, I got 30 minutes. Let's go freaking bench. I do a little warm up, get in there, do some feeder sets, get up and do 2 top sets, and then walk my ass out on a rest day under the assumption that I can recover from that. Is that helpful, hurtful, or just stupid?
So let's see, I'm gonna attack it from different angles. So it's not going to create any muscle growth because it's not high enough of a stimulus. You don't have enough volume in order to create enough muscle damage. So it would be pointless to actually do that. If there's a fun aspect, then just have do something else for fun. But doing just 2 sets isn't going to be enough to actually do anything in terms of muscle size or hypertrophy or muscle damage specifically. Will it impact you negatively? It can, because let's say you train chest on a Wednesday and you just did that on Tuesday. Well, it really depends on the person, but you could have just depleted some glycogen. You could have hindered what you could do the next day in terms of your chest training. You're not creating enough muscle damage to the point where you're going to actually feel sore the next day. So really, it's not the biggest thing in the world. Like one of my clients did like this push-up contest the other day, and it's not like I'm just gonna say no, don't do a push-up contest, because like live your life. But just keeping it in mind, like, am I training chest today or tomorrow? Do I want to just do a bunch of volume below failure, where I could just let my chest rest, stay full of glycogen, and then put all of that effort into my next workout where I can actually create that stimulus with that fatigue, or I just want to create just a little bit of like muscle damage for no stimulus? So it's like, it's not really going to do much.
You won't benefit from it, even though, because a lot of people talk about volume per week. If I hit chest and I hit, 6 sets on Monday, and I have, and I tack a few sets on the end of a shoulder day, are those few sets not helpful?
They are. So
then why is this? Why is then the 2 sets I do on a random day, as long as they're recoverable, not helpful?
So it also depends on how much you're training in the entire week. Yeah. So you can look at it from either total volume in an entire week or just within each workout. Let me being a little loud right now, but if you, let's say, want to progress in volume, and let's say you're doing the most amount of volume you can do in a day to recover from, let's say you do 10 sets for chest, like 10 all-out sets for chest on Monday, and you're like, I don't really want to add more chest volume on that day, but I still want to add more volume in my week. Then adding those 2 sets on Thursday or whatever, it will accumulate volume. So that specific workout, like what I was thinking you were saying is like just like that one workout of 2 sets, that itself isn't going to do much, but the accumulation of doing that. Okay, perfect example, full body workouts. So you're not actually doing very many sets per muscle within each workout, but it's the accumulation of volume within the entire week that creates enough muscle damage in order to progress each week. So yeah, that's basically what it is. It's the accumulation in the week where those 2 sets can benefit you. But if that's all you're doing is 2 sets, then you're not really even maintaining muscle mass doing that.
I meant just like 2 additional sets on a rest day when you feel extra energized and you're like, why the hell not? Assuming you can recover, they're helpful. They add to your total weekly volume.
As long as you are able to, if you feel recovered from your last chest workout and you're doing this and you're not sore and you're not hitting chest, let's say in the next couple of days, then yeah, I don't see a reason why you can't do that. But what's the reason for doing it? For doing that, I would say get the most out of the least. So if you can progress, if you are progressing, doing, let's say, 8 sets per week or 8 sets per workout and doing it once a week, whatever it is, there isn't a reason yet to add more volume. If you need more of a stimulus and you're already getting as much as you can out of each set, that's when I would increase in volume and add those extra 2 sets in, just because you don't want too much fatigue when you already have enough stimulus.
Okay, sweet. Cool. Yeah, I only have 2 more questions, and they're just kind of about, smoking and alcohol. So I've heard the smoking question being asked a lot, but as far as like doing it right after a workout, is there any adverse effects?
No, I would say it can benefit you mentally, physically. There's no physical effect of weed. The only thing that it can do is when you are getting to like the last 4 to 8 weeks of a contest prep where you want to look as lean and as dry as possible, weed can cause you to hold a little bit of subcutaneous water weight, but it doesn't have an effect on body fat or muscle tissue. I've heard both claims that it can improve your metabolism as well as decrease your metabolism. It doesn't actually have that much of an effect on your metabolism to really do anything. The only thing with weed is that I would say just do it in moderation. If you do it too much, that's another stressor that can increase cortisol levels, and we already know what cortisol can do. So being high 24/7, that can have an effect on your cortisol, which is not good for building muscle or losing fat. But if you're able to smoke in moderation, whether it's every night or every day or once a week, and you're able to still hit your macros, follow your diet, not just get the munchies and whatever, and it's not like affecting your productivity or your mental health or anything like that, then it's completely fine, and it's honestly recommended to ease any stress or anxiety.
Sweet. Okay. And then alcohol, with the assumption that obviously if you stick within your calorie goal, you'll be sacrificing most likely, your carbs to enjoy that alcohol. But as far as effects of having like a beer a night or 2 beers a night, what does that cause?
So alcohol slows down the rate of muscle protein synthesis. So if you want to build muscle or maintain muscle while cutting, it's going to be basically doing the opposite of what you want. It's slowing the rate of muscle protein synthesis, which is basically you being able to resynthesize new proteins after breaking them down. So it's probably not the best idea to do the opposite of what steroids do. And then also empty calories. So you're going to be getting a lot of calories without the satiety or the micronutrients that you would get from real food. So if you were to have a beer every single night, one, obviously the muscle protein synthesis is one aspect of it, but also if you're dieting, you are on limited amount of calories. And so you want as much volume as really can digest and absorb without having negative digestive issues. So if you are, let's say, eating 1,800 calories, you don't want to be wasting calories on alcohol, on soda, on candy, things that are not going to fill you up. So it's really only hurting you to spend your calories on that, kind of like a budget. Like if you're going to the mall and you have like $100 gift card or whatever, you want to pick the biggest bang for your buck. You want to get the things that are not just the cheapest, but the things that are going to give you the most amount of benefit for the least amount of cost. So same with food, is you want to get the most benefit, the most satiety, the best tasting foods, the easier psychological effects from a diet with the least amount of calories. That's why high volume foods are very beneficial when dieting. But when bulking, it's very easy to put on more fat when you're eating less satiable foods such as alcohol. So that's every night. If you're doing it every night, I would say it's probably not the most optimal idea. But there's also a psychological effect from the social aspect of alcohol. And so I'm a big advocate of enjoying your life and easing any psychological stress, anxiety, things like that. And alcohol can do that. It's not the trick for it, but it's what some people prefer. So what I do for some people is, and it depends on where they are, if they are severely overweight, I'm not going to let them just go out and drink every single weekend because we got some work to do. But you know, if you're like on a good track and you want to go have a drink like once a month or something, or once in a while, then instead of having a bump in calories on your refeed meal or your refeed day, I'll say plan how much alcohol you're gonna have and then fit that into your daily calories. So to estimate, you're gonna have, let's say, a beer is about 100 calories and a shot is about 100 calories. I don't really recommend having mixed drinks because those are just a bunch of added sugar. So if you want to get drunk, have beers or shots and just leave it at that. Or you can add like diet soda, like if you're gonna have like vodka with like diet Dr. Pepper or something, that's fine. But if, let's say, you want to have 6 drinks total, so 3 beers and 3 shots, that's 600 calories. So use your daily calories and take out 600 calories from that in your carbs and fats. So you can calculate it out, see what, let's say, if you want to take out 100 carbs, that's 300 calories. And then 300 divided by 9, that's how many fats you take out. And then that way you could fit in the 600 calories worth of alcohol and still be within your calorie limit. And doing it just like once in a while isn't going to have very much of an effect on your muscle protein synthesis and in your calorie range. So that's a way to fit alcohol into your life, basically.
Sweet. So you'd say, like, I mean, I'm not a big alcohol drinker as is, but it's definitely not more beneficial, but better for you to choose, you know, if you're going to consume, let's say, 10 beers in a week, it'd be better to consume them all in one day than 2 per night for 5, you know what I'm saying? As long as, you know, not, you know, advocating for alcohol poisoning or anything like that, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So if I were to estimate, I would say it's the same thing. It's the same weekly calories by the end of the day. So it's really not going to have that much of a difference if you were to have 10 beers in one night versus 2 beers a night for 5 nights. What I would say is there's different ways to go about it. If you wanted to carb up and you're at a spot where you can carb up and you just wanted to say, fuck it, you're not on a contest prep, you're not like extremely serious about getting shredded and you just want to have fun but also be lean, then I would say instead of drinking every single night, just drink one night, get it out of the way, and then increase that metabolism from the extra calories, and then go back on your plan the next day. And it's about what you're doing consistently each day that's going to add up to the results versus what you do is one day. So if you were to eat unhealthy foods and just eat a shit ton of food one day, that's not going to have as like, it's got the same effect basically, or same amount of impact as eating extremely healthy one day when the rest of your diet is shit. So one day out of a timeline isn't going to make that big of a difference. So I would say that is better to do. Is 10 beers in one day is going to be a better option than doing the 2 beers 5 days and being more consistent.
As well as from a muscle protein synthesis aspect as well.
So
or
because
is it
it's
even
not
out?
like, I would say it depends. So we don't really know exactly, or like I don't really know like the exact amount that alcohol will affect your muscle protein synthesis, like the ratios, percentage, whatever. But if you're having, let's say, 2 beers a night, it probably won't have a crazy big effect on the amount of muscle you can put on, especially because, like, think about it right now. How much muscle can you put on in a week? Is it really noticeable? No. So having a week where 5 of those nights you're having 2 beers, are you going to build less muscle in those 5 days? No. It's like if you were to drink alcohol 5 days a week for a year, you'll probably see a difference versus not drinking alcohol for that year. So it's really just like 1 week. It's not gonna have that big of a difference. But in terms of muscle protein synthesis, would I say 1 day of 10 beers versus the 5 days of 2 beers? Honestly, I would just say it's probably gonna be the same effect. Really, it's not gonna be anything noticeable. That's basically what I would say.
Okay. Sweet.
Yeah.
That's all the questions I have.
That was a good question to end off on.
Sweet.
Cool.
All right. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, no problem at all. I'm probably gonna post this video on YouTube, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. So anytime you have any other questions, you can always send them to me over text.
Sweet.
Cool.
All
Awesome.
right. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, appreciate the questions.
You have a good night, man.
Yeah, you too.